I want to take a minute and try to explain to you some of the errors that you make when you make question formations in English, and there are many, so I've got them color coded and I'm going to explain them one by one. So here is the answer, and we want you to change this into the question. So error number one here, if I click on it, is you have forgotten to add the auxiliary verb. So you might give me a question, why you went home 2 weeks ago. And this, of course, is unacceptable in English because you do not have an auxiliary. All question forms have an auxiliary with the except for the ones that are talking about the subject. So why did you went home 2 weeks ago doesn't work. You have to add back your verb. Why did you go home? Number two, auxiliary is okay. Why did you went? But you forgot to put the verb in the base form. So again, why did you go? Not why did you went? The next problem is that you have the wrong auxiliary. You say, why is you went home? You should probably know by now that with any action verb, any verb, we're going to use do, does, or did in its different forms. So in this case, is the wrong one. You have to replace it with did. And you have to conjugate the verb in the base form when you have the past tense here. The other problem here, of course, is present tense and went is past tense. And the last question has a problem with auxiliary verb and verb conjugated in different tenses. So why do you went makes no sense in English, because in English the went is past tense, so why did, and then this goes back to go, right? So here's your formula: quasav, question word, auxiliary, subject, verb. The auxiliary is conjugated in the correct verb tense, and the verb should be in base form, which in this case is go. Let's take a look at the next sections. When you are talking about continuous or progressive tenses, which in English are made by using the auxiliary to be plus the verb ing form, you have some problems. I was studying hard for the English test is the answer. And some of you will answer by saying how you studying for the English test, which is wrong because you have no auxiliary verb, and so therefore you can't ask a question without the auxiliary verb in this case. Error number two, to be is conjugated improperly. Why was you studying is wrong because you, if you look at you here, the past tenses were and not was. So I was, he was, she was, it was, you, we, you, and they are were. So why were you studying would be the correct form. And number three, the verb in the continuous progressive tense must be verb ing, which is the present participle. Why were you study? For the English test makes no sense because with to be, were, we cannot use a verb unless it's an ing verb. Okay? So the correct form, why were you studying for the English exam? Conjugate the auxiliary in the correct verb tense, and don't forget to keep the verb ing so that we know that this is not finished, it's progressive or continuous. Let's go and look at the next series of problems. We have some errors with questions when the modal verb, we have modal verbs in English, so am is can, could, shall, should, will, would, must, have to, and so on exist, and they're called modal verbs. So Veronique can come. Generally, you can recognize them because they fall between the subject and the verb, and so you have to use them. So error number one is you keep the auxiliary can in the wrong place. So when Veronique can come back into the meeting is not a question. You actually should move the can into the correct position here. So when can Veronique come back to the meeting is correct. Error number 2, you put in an extra auxiliary, an ordinary one, a regular one. When do Veronique can come? Well, can gives you more information than do, so you should remove the do and just put the can in front here. So don't use do when you have a modal auxiliary. And number 3, error conjugating the verb when there is a modal auxiliary is a problem. So when can Veronique comes back to the meeting doesn't work because the S normally would be on the auxiliary, can. But you should know that all modal auxiliaries do not are invariable, and so do not take an S. So when can Veronique come, not comes, back to the meeting is the correct form. Remember, it's a question word, auxiliary subject verb. We conjugate the verb and we keep the auxiliary verb and we keep the basic verb in the base form. So the correct form here, when can Veronique come back to the meetings? All right, so please check your question formations and see which error you have made and try to understand why it doesn't work in English. All right, thank you.